They whispered her name long after she was gone, as if saying it too loudly might summon her shadow back into the palace halls. Wu Zetian was not supposed to exist the way she did. In a world built to silence women, she ruled absolutely. In a world that demanded obedience, she commanded fear. And in a world that recorded history through the hands of men who despised her, her private life became a battlefield of rumors, half-truths, and deliberate distortions. Among those stories, none was repeated with more fascination or horror than the tale of her so-called male harem, a secret court of men said to exist behind silk screens and locked doors, where power and survival were more important than desire. To understand how such a story could even begin, one must first understand how Wu Zetian rose. She did not begin life as an empress, nor even as a queen. She entered the Tang court as a young concubine, one of many, trained to speak carefully, walk softly, and never draw too much attention. Yet attention found her anyway. She was intelligent in a way that unsettled people. She listened more than she spoke, remembered everything, and learned quickly how the palace truly worked, not as it was described in rituals, but as it functioned through ambition, jealousy, and fear. When Emperor Taizong died, Wu Zetian was sent away, her future seemingly erased. By tradition, concubines without sons were removed from court life, often forced into religious seclusion. Most women disappeared at that point, becoming footnotes if they were remembered at all. Wu Zetian did not accept disappearance. She returned to power through Emperor Gaozong, not as a passive companion, but as a partner who understood governance as well as, if not better than, the men around her. As her influence grew, so did resistance. Confucian scholars believed the universe itself would rebel against a woman ruling men. Court officials whispered that disasters, floods, and illness were signs of heaven's anger. Wu Zetian answered not with apologies, but with action. She removed rivals, rewrote laws, elevated those loyal to her, and punished betrayal swiftly. By the time she declared herself emperor, the only woman in Chinese history to do so, she had already learned a critical truth: power must be defended not just publicly, but privately. It is within this private world that the story of the male harem emerges. Unlike emperors, whose large harems were normalized and rarely questioned, Wu Zetian's court was watched with obsessive scrutiny. Every male official near her was suspected. Every trusted aide was accused of intimacy. The mere presence of men in her inner circle became evidence for later historians who were determined to portray her as unnatural, immoral, and dangerous. Some men were undeniably close to her. Brothers Zhang Yizhi and Zhang Changzong are the most famous names associated with these stories. They were young, handsome, and visibly favored by the empress. They lived within the palace complex, had unrestricted access to her presence, and rose rapidly in rank. To her enemies, this was proof enough. To supporters, it was no different from the way male emperors elevated favored concubines or advisors. The difference was not the act itself, but who held power. Life inside Wu Zetian's inner court was not one of pleasure, as later storytellers imagined. It was a space defined by constant tension. Those who entered understood that proximity to the empress was both an opportunity and a risk. Favor could bring wealth, titles, and influence. A single misstep could bring exile or death. The men closest to her were watched relentlessly by other officials, hoping to find weakness, corruption, or scandal to use against them, and against her. The palace itself became a place where silence was survival. Servants learned not to see. Guards learned not to hear. Letters were read, conversations monitored, and loyalty tested. Wu Zetian trusted few, and even those she trusted were never fully safe. She had learned too well how easily power could be taken. As she aged, the scrutiny intensified. A woman ruling alone was already intolerable to many. An older woman ruling men was, to them, an insult to nature. Stories about her private life became more grotesque, more exaggerated, and more cruel. Her court was described as decadent. Her relationships were portrayed as predatory. The men near her were painted as helpless captives or immoral opportunists, depending on who was telling the story. Yet beneath the accusations lies a more complex truth. Wu Zetian did not build her inner circle for indulgence, but for control. Unlike male emperors who relied heavily on families of concubines, she surrounded herself with individuals whose power depended entirely on her favor. This minimized the risk of rival clans rising against her. The men closest to her had no independent political base. Their survival was tied to her continued rule. This strategy made her enemies furious. It denied them access. It denied them leverage. And it denied them the comforting belief that she could be controlled. So they did what threatened men have always done when faced with an uncontainable woman: they reduced her to scandal. Official histories written after her death were not neutral. They were composed under dynasties eager to restore traditional gender order. Wu Zetian's accomplishments, expanding civil service exams, supporting agriculture, stabilizing the empire, were overshadowed by lurid accounts of her private life. The male harem became a symbol, not of what she did, but of what her critics needed her to represent: chaos, excess, and moral decay. But those who truly lived within her court understood a different reality. The palace was not a place of indulgence, but of calculation. The men who stood beside Wu Zetian were not masters of pleasure, but pieces on a political board. Some sought advancement. Some sought protection. Some believed in her vision of rule. All understood that being close to the most powerful woman in the empire meant living under a gaze that never rested. Wu Zetian ruled until the end of her life, not as a figurehead, but as an active force. When she was finally removed, it was not because of scandal, but because age weakened her grip and her enemies seized the moment. Almost immediately, the narrative hardened. Her legacy was reshaped to warn future generations. This is what happens when women rule. And yet, centuries later, the whispers have not faded. They linger because they reveal more about those who told them than about the woman they targeted. The story of Wu Zetian's male harem is not just a tale of secrecy. It is a mirror held up to a society terrified of female authority. The truth is quieter, colder, and far more unsettling. Wu Zetian did not rule through desire. She ruled through intelligence, fear, and absolute awareness of how fragile power truly is. And that, more than any imagined scandal, is what made her unforgettable. As Wu Zetian's reign entered its final years, the palace no longer felt like a place of ascent but of tightening walls. Power had brought her to the summit, but maintaining it required constant vigilance, and age made that vigilance heavier. The same court that once feared her now waited patiently, like hunters hiding in tall grass. The men closest to her felt this shift first. Every glance lingered longer. Every whisper carried farther. The inner court, once a shield, slowly became a trap. The Zhang brothers stood at the center of this storm. To the outside world, they were symbols of excess, proof that the empress ruled through personal indulgence. Inside the palace, their position was far more precarious. Their influence existed only because Wu Zetian allowed it. They signed no laws in their own name. They commanded no armies. Their power was proximity, and proximity is the most fragile currency in politics. As Wu Zetian aged, illness began to slow her movements and cloud her strength. Court officials who had long remained silent sensed opportunity. They framed their resistance not as rebellion, but as moral correction. They spoke of restoring order, of protecting the dynasty, of saving the empire from corruption. But beneath those noble words lay a simpler hunger, to erase a woman who had proven them wrong. The palace became divided into invisible factions. Some remained loyal out of gratitude or fear. Others shifted carefully, offering public obedience while quietly preparing for her fall. Wu Zetian understood this better than anyone. She had survived too long not to recognize the signs. Yet even she could not stop time itself. The very system she had mastered now worked against her, because it was designed to abandon the weak. Rumors intensified as her health declined. The male harem narrative grew more extreme, more grotesque, as if repetition could make it true. Officials submitted memorials accusing the Zhang brothers of corruption, manipulation, and moral decay. Each accusation was also an accusation against the empress herself. To remove them was to admit guilt. To protect them was to confirm suspicion. Wu Zetian hesitated, not because she was blind, but because she knew the cost of either choice. Removing them would embolden her enemies. Keeping them would accelerate the campaign against her. For the first time in her life, she faced a situation with no clean solution. The end came swiftly. A coup formed quietly among high-ranking officials and members of the imperial family. They moved not with chaos, but with precision. The Zhang brothers were accused, arrested, and executed almost immediately. Their deaths were violent, public, and symbolic. It was not enough to remove them, they had to be destroyed in a way that sent a message. This was the price of standing too close to a woman who ruled. Wu Zetian was forced to abdicate soon after. She was not dragged from the throne in chains. That would have risked unrest. Instead, she was surrounded, isolated, and persuaded that resignation was necessary for the stability of the empire. The language was respectful. The intent was not. Her authority was stripped away piece by piece until only the title remained, and then even that was gone. When she died, the silence was deliberate. What followed was not mourning, but rewriting. Official historians, almost all male and deeply invested in Confucian orthodoxy, seized control of her story. They framed her reign as an aberration, a warning rather than an achievement. Her reforms were minimized. Her competence was questioned. Her intelligence was reframed as cunning. Her authority was recast as cruelty. And at the center of this distortion stood the story of the male harem. It became a convenient tool. It explained everything her critics could not accept. If she ruled well, it was because she manipulated men. If she ruled harshly, it was because she was morally corrupt. If she succeeded, it was not merit but indulgence. The men around her were no longer political actors, but victims or accomplices in a scandal designed to overshadow governance. Over time, the story hardened into legend. Plays exaggerated it. Poems mocked it. Later histories treated rumor as fact. The nuance vanished. What remained was a caricature, an unnatural woman surrounded by submissive men, ruling through desire rather than discipline. Yet when modern historians examine records without inherited prejudice, a different picture emerges. Wu Zetian ruled an empire of millions for decades. She stabilized borders, expanded education through civil service exams, promoted capable officials regardless of family background, and maintained internal order during a period that could have collapsed under weaker leadership. None of this was accidental. None of it was the product of indulgence. The men in her inner circle were not ornaments. They were tools, buffers, and, at times, shields. In a system where female authority was constantly undermined, she constructed a court that depended on her alone. That decision made her powerful, and made her unforgivable. The true horror of the male harem narrative is not what it claims about Wu Zetian, but what it reveals about history itself. It shows how easily female power is sexualized, how quickly leadership becomes scandal when the ruler does not fit expectation. Male emperors who kept hundreds of women are remembered as virile, or normal. A woman who trusted a handful of men is remembered as monstrous. Wu Zetian understood this long before her death. She knew history would not be kind. That is why she ordered that her tomb inscription be left blank. No praise. No defense. No explanation. She refused to let her enemies define her in stone. The silence of that blank monument speaks louder than any accusation. It forces later generations to confront the uncomfortable truth that history is not merely recorded, it is chosen. Wu Zetian was not a villain born of excess, nor a myth created by scandal. She was a ruler who mastered a system built to exclude her, and in doing so, exposed its hypocrisy. The story of her male harem survives because it comforts those who fear powerful women. But beneath that story lies a deeper reality. She ruled because she was capable, she survived because she was ruthless, and she is remembered because she was unstoppable. And that is the secret history no one wanted to tell.